Where's the fucking... Oh my god, you guys are terrible.
They're arranged in a giant circle, about 2 meters in diameter, so it's like 6 or 7 feet wide. And it's not just a circle. It's circles within circles with radial trenches, usually in different layers, dug into the seabed, and even the space trenches for the outer rings, or the radial trenches that extend out. And then towards the center is the down split.
No? Okay. It's fucking fruits, how's wrong with you? Let's fix everything. Okay. I think it's so long to set up. Fuck. Wait. Do screen. Man, buggy as fuck. Okay.
But we don't have one in our household that size. I'm not completely sure. I never had one as a kid either. The inner disc especially, really wrong, because you've got these like radial trenches going out towards the outer edges, but this inner disc especially with the weirder, more maze-like structure, it reminds me of a spirograph sort of, or kind of like, you know those Celtic knot designs? Oh yeah, I think people, I don't really know anything about what those are. I think they have some kind of cultural significance. I don't know anything about them, but it looks kind of like that. Millhouse would have loved this. Millhouse? Yeah, what the Millhouse spirograph is? Oh, I don't know. I think you're coffee but well, if he goes down scuba diving off the coast of the
What are you guys even talking about?
Millhouse, because he might be likely to come across one of these. But the question is, what causes them? Now, their sighting in 1995 wasn't the only time they've ever appeared. Other divers have apparently spotted them across the years, no doubt always making people wonder about the messages from the alien deep or elaborate, unannounced, like underwater art projects. And to go back to some of those crop circle theories,
oh my god,
someone might have seen these and contemplated some sort of strange vortices in the deep being behind it, some sort of vortex. Swirling up the sand and leaving this pattern. You can maybe imagine something like that. It feels almost too deliberate or designed to be that way. But, sometimes things in nature can be deceiving. Like we were just talking about, like some formations of ice look really like they were designed, but they're not. They just grow that way. I mean, you look at a snowflake, right? I mean, we're all kind of over it. We've all seen snowflakes. We know the complexity and beauty of the crystals. But if you take a step back and sort of clean the slate and look at it, I think this is absolutely amazing to behold. It looks like something that has been designed. And all that just tells you that our intuitions about what looks natural and what looks designed are sometimes sort of on track, but they can be way off too. Right. Now, if we consider the idea of design for these things, like if they were some sort of underwater art project, so like the crop circles, if they've been made by hoaxsters or artists, people who wanted others to come see what they had done, I would have wondered, how would a human expect them to be discovered with them being down on the sea?
Oh my god, you guys fucking stop talking about fucking...
They're not even crop circles with flat
okay.
Their patterns carved in underwater sand, so they're liable to be washed away by the whimsical, mechanics of water and marine life in almost no time, probably a matter of days. Who would make such a thing? to what you might say, Doug and Dave.
Yes, I want former MPs. That's helpful.
The time frame would match up. 91, they're done with crop circles. 95? Yeah. Suddenly there are circles on the bottom of the sea. Maybe they got their scuba licenses and they set out for Japan. No, that's not what happened. But if we were to
Fucking
compare
man, this guy's a
to
genius
human
over here.
art,
Like,
I would say the nearest example that
this
can
is
be
like
covered
mind blowing
are
fucking stuff here.
mandalas of colored sand.
I hope someone's writing all of this down.
Except, as we alluded to earlier, they're not only fleeting,
Relax,
but they're in places
Jean.
of extremely limited human traffic. Yeah, you would only expect like scuba divers to find these. Right, and then they may be in areas where there just aren't that many. Well, there aren't that many scuba divers, just period, compared to the rest of the human population. Certainly compared to other creatures living in the sea, and so that most of them might just go unobserved. It would be like if I decided to build a tiny Stonehenge out of barbecue pork ribs in the middle of a rainforest. Nobody's going to see it, and it's going to be gone. Almost immediately. Some ambitious artist out there is taking note, though, Robert. Actually, I can see that being a great.
What the fuck did I say?
You just leave a camera filming it, like
Saint Anne, I think.
out in the rainforest,
That's what we're going for.
and just time lapse.
Because obviously, the screen is not on here.
We go into this a little bit in our old episode, Unfinished, on various
Saint Maurice, Saint Jacques, maybe.
Potentially unfinished, and I think
why? Under a different name though.
Various sculptures that have been made out of something that will decay, or certainly the self-shredding piece of art that Banksy recently debuted. That was pretty good. I did like that. So it's not to say that these patterns are like beyond the pale when it comes to human art. Like, yeah, humans could conceivably do this. We are weird creatures. But the actual explanation is even weirder. So we're going to take one more break. And when we come back, we'll see if you manage to guess. So you have one more ad break to try and guess what is causing.
I'm assuming it's with Trudeau too.
Weekends with Ken. On Sunday morning show at 7:10, we'll talk to a Montrealer.
Half an nervy breaky.
Educate those caring for a family member with dementia. Dr. Chris Lavos at 8:10 on the risk of suffering long-term from COVID despite mild symptoms. And at 8:20, if you're a fan of live music, we'll celebrate one of the world's great concert venues and give away a beautiful book on it too. The latest news and a whole lot more. Weekends with Ken.
I'm fucking crazy. So I love you within your fucking heads, man.
News Talk Radio. CJAD 800.
Fucking know my mother's a hypochondriac, so that's good. I'm fucking brought up on fucking antibiotic and fucking prednisone, which is like just steroids for your fucking lungs, oxygen masks. One of my brain's fried.
Call 514-631-1511 or visit jjcardinal.ca.
Alright.
You think people get a prison as a little male? If you don't have Crave, you're missing out on exclusive shows like
and bad credit, but you know you don't have a credit card. Never gonna have a fucking account. Don't do that, because they're Bell.
Subscribe now at crave.ca.
No, don't do it. It's a fucking trap. It's a fucking bad credit now, because it's fucking that. And you bill me twice a month. It took me forever. It took me for fucking just to not have a fucking account anymore. Even though I still have a TD account. Just sits there. These fucking Scotiabank gives my fucking money back.
Visit Presti.ca for more details.
Oh my god. Okay. Fucking hate it.
Always remember and always shine bright. The Lighthouse brightens the lives of seriously ill children and their families. My name is Jahar, and the Lighthouse has been helping to light the way for our families since my son mother was 4 years old. Donation, please pass by at the light.ca.
Gentlemen, are we having trouble in the bedroom?
I'm born sick.
So to speak, to talk about intimacy.
Constantly.
Or maybe it's
Constantly
not
sick.
hard, as it were. If you feel like it's all happening too fast, consider a visit to Elvis Sexual Wellness. Talk about it with your partner. That's the most important part. And then book a consultation at elvissexualwellness.com. Even if it's medical treatment, help is available. Always with respect and discretion. Take a break from your usual online activity and visit elvissexualwellness.com.
So many Quebecers suffer from back pain, which,
look at
when
that.
left untreated, can result in a loss of quality of life. The Quebec Chiropractors Association invites you to learn more. Visit
Let's hook you up with some dillies.
for more information about the practice. You can find tips and advice for daily activities and where you can find the chiropractor closest to you. Be well
I'm fucking
informed.
like
Prevent
snorting
injury
dillies
and
at like
live your
fucking
life
what?
to the fullest.
So
Pain changes
17 or
everything.
something.
Chiropractic care
Retarded.
changes pain.
This is News Talk Radio.
Can't get Oxycontin, but fuck, they load you up with a whole lot of
You are listening to one of the best podcasts.
but they can't do anything for my hand. It's great. I had to pay.
Just to Blow Your Mind podcast.
All right, we're back. Okay, so now
Great.
we're going to get to the real explanation for the underwater crop circles. So around 2011, 2012,
Fucking not
a
fair.
team of researchers named Hiroshi Kawase, Yoji Okata, who is also, I think, is an underwater photographer who documented these patterns, and Kimiaki Ito, they finally performed research to confirm the origin and function of these underwater mystery circles. The results were published in 2013 in Nature Scientific Reports, and here's what we found out. The real culprit is fish sex. Ah, fish sex. Always weird. You're right, and we're never going to run out of amazement for fish sex. We talked about this with Mara Hart. Like, the marine reproduction is just like, it's the, what's the magical thing? The endless bag? You just reach in and there's all the bag of holding, I guess? Yeah, or the magic well, yeah, you just never run out. There's always more interesting, weird mating and reproduction practices under the waves. Now, like, finish listening to this episode before you go and search for footage, but there is some fabulous footage of what we're going to be talking about here. And our devoted Attenborough viewers probably guessed from the very beginning, because the 5th episode of the 6-part TV series Life Stories
Okay.
from a couple years back has some amazing
Lower
footage
St.
of
Lawrence.
these circles and of the fish sex response.
I mean,
If you're a Netflix viewer in the United States, then you have access to this show as of this recording. Did that come out in 2014? Yes, I believe it did. Yeah, I actually went and watched this, especially after you recommended it, and it is wonderful to watch. It's also kind of funny. Yeah, but it's beautiful film too, and they do a great job revealing what has been created in the sand. It's a BBC Nature documentary. Yeah, they know how to do it. They do. So specifically, these forbidden geometries were caused by the mating rituals of a
what the fuck?
called torqueginer, which in Latin I believe means something about making circles. I think like the Latin word torquis can be translated as necklace, but I'm not fully sure about that translation. I think there's something going on there. Anyway, specifically, the species in question.
It sounds like you tried to say tuckus, like butt.
Torqueginer albomaculosus, or the white-spotted pufferfish. And Robert, I've included an image for us to look at here. I'm sorry you
guys are
we'll
like
do our best to describe it.
fucking
It's a small but magnificent little specimen. Yeah, if you're looking up this episode at stufftoblowyourmind.com, I will include an image of these fish.
Those people are fucking weird.
So it's not to spoil it for anybody, but you might look at them and you're going to instantly recognize that this
super weird. Like they talk to their fish.
Puffer fish, you know, that
I have a dried pufferfish
face.
from
And sometimes it is very
where
much
is it
like
from?
a face. If you've ever been to an aquarium and
Barbados,
you've
I
got to
think.
take a picture of them with your smartphone, sometimes it will do the
Nope,
the little
because I've
facial
never been
identification
on
over their little
a
face.
plane.
Oh, yeah.
I
Or
sat on a
many people
plane
think
because
that
my
the
uncle
person-
worked
yeah,
at
they were like,
Bombardier.
"Oh, I see the face. Let's
But,
frame this
like,
up." And then when you
it never
put that
took
photo on
off.
social media,
So
it may say,
I worked
"Hey,
at an
don't you
airport."
wanna tag the toadfish here? Yeah, or auto tag. Isn't
You
this
talk
your
to
friend
people now.
Jeffrey? Yeah,
Then
this is-
you're
this
like,
is
"Oh,
probably
you
Jeffrey
must love
or
working here
Ron
and
or one of
flying
these other
and
people.
fuck, you must fly a lot." I'm like, no, I've never been on a plane.
One of the things,
They're like,
though,
you
is
just
when
talk
you
me
look
down.
at this particular pufferfish, you might think, well, this guy's not that flashy.
Oh god, that guy's a
Now,
criminal.
to be fair, he's still a beautiful
fuck, what is
fish.
his name?
All the members
That was
of the
fucking dick.
family, Tetriodonte de Rio, are
HMS
beautiful.
host.
Because we're talking about
Guy's a
pufferfish,
fucking
puffers,
super huge
balloonfish,
criminal.
blowfish, blowies, bubblefish, globefish, swellfish, toadfish, toadies, honey toads, sugar toads, and the
Redfish,
mighty sea squaws.
bluefish.
Now, they are related to porcupine fish, but they're not.
You guys
The porcupine
suck.
fish are not actually part of
Okay,
the
who's
family.
St. Henry,
They're
St.
all amazing
Anne,
creatures.
Liberal
So many
Party?
of them are toxic. They can move their eyes independently. Some can actually alter their patterns for camouflage purposes. And puffers can, of course,
I just
inflate
feel
their
like,
bodies with
honestly,
water or even air if they're out of the water
I
to
would
form
be
an imposing,
talking to nobody.
to take on the form of an imposing
Fuck
spiked
Liberal
spear,
Party.
kind of like the head of a medieval mace.
And is this the reason that they often look kind of strangely shaped to begin with?
Yeah, sometimes they have a very boxy appearance. Right. But
Actually
anyway, back to T. albomaculosus here. He's
feels
beautiful,
better.
but unlike the rest of the family,
Okay.
he's not that flashy. He doesn't have amazing glittering colorization. He doesn't have a bunch of cool spines. So when it comes to catching the eyes of a potential mate, he has other tools up his
Chocolatier?
sleeve.
Exactly right.
Maybe?
And that's where this underwater sign in the sand comes in. If the
National
male wants to mate,
Sacred.
he carves the sacred sign.
It's like a hoboglyph for breeding.
Yeah, it's not, except instead of like good beans here or whatever, it's like good mating here. So we've heard of males in the animal kingdom before who advertise mating fitness with big tails or loud songs or bright colors. But this
Great.
building of
That's
what looks
really good.
like geometric art in the sand of the seabed is a strange and fascinating form of mate attraction. Now, of course, these pufferfish would not be the only animals that build a physical structure to attract mates. One example that immediately comes to mind that we've talked about on the show before is bowerbirds, where males build these elaborate nests to attract females for mating.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about nature documentary superstars, those bowerbirds have definitely enjoyed a lot of screen time. They craft these structures that entail form and colors that are purely statements of fitness. They're not building structures to live in. It's all about communicating with a potential mate. Another interesting thing about bowerbirds, though, that sometimes I forget if I'm watching like one documentary covering one species and
Why do you guys have
not
so
another
much
species,
free
is that
time?
some species of bowerbird are rather plain looking, kind of fitting the form we've been talking about here, a creature that is not flashy but does something flashy. And yet at the same time, you have creatures like the
my
flame
computer.
bowerbird,
With no
which
fucking
has
shit.
kind of the same color scheme as those bright orange, dismemberment-prone fireys in Jim Henson's Labyrinth. Do you remember those creatures?
He looks to me like a Days of Thunder sunset.
He does, yeah. He's brighter than the fireys. He's brighter, just about brighter than any sunset I've seen. He looks as bright as like the most obnoxious slushy you might purchase at a roadside slushy stand.
He's something from that flip book they got at the tables at Chili's.
Yeah, exactly. So this is already a really bright specimen. So it's almost kind of amazing to realize that he's going a step beyond. He's going to create this impressive bower to bring in a mate.
Now, one interesting thing about bowerbirds is that, you see this contrast between, like, flashy colors they would show off, which are often a sign of, like, mate fitness that males can use to signal attractiveness to females, but also building these nests is that I've read that there is sometimes a trade-off there, like the flashier-looking bowerbirds build less elaborate nests, and the ones that look, more drab and have less colors and stuff build more elaborate nests.
I swear, I bet someone bang at me, I will
like, hey, I
fucking
don't have
kill
all
all
the
of
flashy
you.
outfits,
Fuck
but
off.
I can build a really good house.
I already come be in my apartment.
There's still
So,
some balance.
fuck you guys.
Now, another bird that I really love for its nest building capabilities as an advertisement of mate fitness.
You know what?
is
Yeah,
known
you're right.
as
I'll just turn it down. Oh, yeah. I need to slightly hear it.
These are pretty funny.
It makes me want to fucking put a bullet in my head. Holy shit.
So there's
Like,
a species of megapode,
what?
which is a type of bird, of course, megapode means huge foot.
Like, I love animals. You guys, like, so far picked, like, two of my most fucking hated animals because I worked with them.
Often as big as a car, like 1 to 1.5 meters high and 4 meters wide, out of soil and dead plant matter and just rotting stuff. And these are nests to attract females, and they're not merely an aesthetic statement like, why wouldn't you like to come hang out on my gigantic pile of rot? The decomposition of dead stuff
that's my dog
actually generates a lot of heat, which helps keep the female's eggs warm when she lays them on the mound she's chosen. And they apparently the brush turkeys even reportedly regulate the temperature of the mound by adding or removing plant matter if the temperature isn't just right.
That's brilliant.
But as
you can imagine building like a car-sized mound of rotting plant matter is not an easy task. So if a turkey does this, it might take him a month to do it, and it could basically like wear him to death to do this thing. So
You guys are gonna wear me to death if you guys don't start.
This big compost heap to man. This is a serious investment that
Talking about actual fucking life.
And this brings us back to the white-spotted pufferfish.
Oh yeah.
What are its reasons, right?
Mm.
Like, it's making an investment.
In the loose sediment of the seafloor, what is the male pufferfish doing, and why is the female attracted? And also, I mean, consider the amazing disparity in scale with the amount of work we're talking about here. Because these patterns that are carved in the sand are up to 2 meters across, which is like 6 or 7 feet. Meanwhile, this fish that makes them is only like 10 to 12 centimeters long, maybe about 5 inches. So to get a sense of the scale of this and the work involved, I want to quote our friend and recent guest on the show, the marine biologist Mara Hart, from her book Sex and the Sea. She writes, quote, "Next time you visit a beach, imagine building a giant sand wheel with radiating spokes and troughs that stretch over 100 feet across. Now imagine carving the whole thing by scooting around on your bottom," which is basically what this male fish does. This tiny fish that could fit in the palm of your hand builds this giant elaborate artwork by rubbing its body and fins along on the sand, vibrating its pectoral fins, anal fin, and tail fin.
You said anal.
Underbelly into the sand to sort of push it down and forward. And after he's carved these peaks and valleys into the sand, he also decorates the carving with bits of material he finds, like coral and pieces of seashell that go up on the along these radial
Told you,
lines.
fish people are super weird.
Usually takes about
They're
a week
super
of constant work to make a design like this. And as we've been saying, it's totally ephemeral. This nest that it builds in the sand will soon be turned away by the sea. So why all this work? Now, one idea is that this elaborate design helps the female find the male pufferfish, right? Because when you make a design like this, it creates an unnatural pattern of contrast in bright and dark patches along the seafloor. And the sand attracts the female's eye on the otherwise monotonous bottom of the ocean.
Right. It's like it's a roadside billboard advertising.
You guys keep automatically putting it
now, this
to
might be part of
English.
the explanation. It probably does help her see him.
You never did that before.
Not all of it. So I want to refer
Oh,
to
the fucking
authors I mentioned earlier by Kawase, Okada, and Ito. And this is their study from 2013 in Scientific Reports.
Fucking retarded.
Huge geometric circular structures.
Fucking knew it. Like, you guys started to fucking do your voiceovers in Parliament fucking different. You start fucking tuning them out completely.
Plays a role in mate choice. Like, you build a better nest and you get a better chance at mating, but they had not identified what all of those qualities of an attractive nest were. So here's one possible element that comes out of their research. They found that the creation
fisheries and fuck's sake, what the fuck is wrong with why are you guys fucking talking about this so much? National Assembly, culture, education. God, that's fucking so painful. Public, finance, institutions, citizen relations, health, social services, transport, environment.
Particles of sand and helps push them toward the center of the circle. So that the finished product of this symbol nest should contain very fine sediment.
Council administrators.
Now, if a female begins to approach the nest, the male will usually fan the central disc of this fine sediment to churn up a cloud in the water, and then he'll swim back and forth through the cloud that he's churned up. And if the female likes what she sees, she will enter the nest area and travel to the center where these.
Hey, Christian Dubé is on here. That guy's a fucking.
The male will usually dart back
that guy needs to grow a spine. Can't wait till he quits.
In the section in her book, Laura Hart mentions that it's hard not to
or resigns.
Did you see this part?
Fucking just literally pulling a Nixon.
I mean,
You pulled a Nixon.
They're cute little fish. Yeah, I mean, they're cute little fish. It's very difficult not to anthropomorphize them. Again, you're coming back to that.
Oh, it's fucking freezing again. Alright. Why does it have to fucking always be snowing, fuck? Oh, what? So you guys can give me a fucking fucking report on it for like half an hour. Forgot. Shut up. Fuck. Because I literally can't make sound anywhere, ever. Even if I pay for it. Fucking have to go to a fucking native reserve. Isn't that ironic? A white person being thrilled to go on a fucking native reserve where I have to fucking act like fucking Anne Frank. Fucking underground Canada. Except I have to go to the kids will be slaughtered. It sucks. We might have to go talk to a native. Which super sucks. You know what? That's a better idea. Because I can't seem to find anybody who's responsible in the government of Quebec. So. This is impossible. Yeah, it's like fucking. I don't know why you guys keep saying that kids are fucking like into politics too. That's the thing you've been writing on a lot is kids being in politics. Okay.
That protection from the ocean currents
Oh.
also helps keep
You okay?
the fine-grained sand particles there that would normally be more easily washed away by the water current.
You wanted to come in the car.
After they hatch and
Okay, well.
disappear, the male does not
Fucking MCK.
Instead, he goes on to build a totally new nest for the next mating cycle, which is a tremendous
Nope.
amount of work. Remember, again, like trying to think about building like 100-foot wide
Alright.
temple in the beach sand by dragging your butt along. You're like, this is just like, why go through all that work? And while the old nest just continues to
No.
wash away into nothing, like, you often appreciate how much risky investment building is for some animals as well. Humans go to the gym to intentionally burn calories and
How do I get it?
labor.
Oh, got no longer.
Edge of a wild energy economy. The amount of work it takes to build an elaborate nest.
This is freaking so dumb.
It's kind of like what if humans in order
Oh.
to each of us had to make a concept album?
Shit, rats for life.
Like you
My
wouldn't
life.
have a
I
shot
swear to
unless
God,
you
I've never seen
really
this.
wrote and produced and like brought in session musicians and commissioned artwork.
How was he able to fucking murder after this? I just follow the line after fucking terrible. But she's in traffic at 11:30 at night for 2 hours. Like, why not?
But anyway, yeah, so with this question for the pufferfish, like, why make the rock opera album about the Silmarillion new each time? Why not just, like, sort of, like, touch up the last concept album we made? Yeah, so it's kind of do like everybody most acts do, right? Slightly retweaking of what came before. Yeah, just do the sequel. And the authors suggest that what's going on here is probably that the process of mating and then what's happening while, you know, the eggs are there waiting to hatch, it depletes the nest
Oh,
of
my
these
gosh.
fine sand particles, which are somehow crucial for the female's eggs. That would make sense. He has engineered his local environment, and now he needs to re-engineer another. It's kind of it's like he's cut down the forest, built the love hunt. The love hunt is gone. Now he needs to find a new virgin forest to recreate it in his image. Yeah. You know, another study I just looked at very quickly that I thought was kind of interesting was also in Scientific Reports. It was last year in 2018 by Mizuchi, Kawase, Shin, Hawaii, and Kondo. And this was called Simple Rules for Construction of a Geometric Nest Structure by Pufferfish. This answers the question, okay, something must be happening in the fish's brain to tell it how to build this underwater, you know, Poseidon, right? So what's happening? The study observed and formalized rules for the creation of nest sites, which it turned out are actually a pretty simple algorithm that they were able to recreate with a computer program. This kind of reminds me of how we discussed in our episode about spiders building webs, how a really relatively simple list of rules can lead to considerable content designs in nature. Like the algorithm itself for the creation of a structure by an animal doesn't have to be complex to create an emergently complex final structure that looks very impressive to us. Yeah, you know, I mean,
Doesn't understand boundaries. It's my codes. Great.
Patterns in the sand, in the crops, about the attractiveness of patterns
Okay.
like this. Like, what does the female see when she makes the choice? You know, she looks at one nest versus another nest and goes to one instead of the other, or simply goes toward one that is not attractive enough to go to, another one she comes across. I think that
Like, oh shit, guys.
broad preferences for certain kinds of abstract geometrical shapes and figures over others.
Aw, you guys, I feel so fucking bad.
Prefer curved and symmetrical shapes over sharp angles and asymmetrical shapes. And sometimes I wonder, like, I don't know the answer to this, but I wonder how deep do these preferences go? Is it possible that animals with even, much simpler nervous systems, like fish, for instance, also have similar preferences in abstract geometric shapes? Not just that I, have an avoidance behavior.
Fucking the Guanawagwe website. It's the only way you can get any information, or just go talk to somebody about it. I don't know how you guys fucking pass information. Oh, maybe like fucking moms and shit. It's fake. Online payments via access TV. Yeah. So it's fucking Bill C-218 press release. Starts true reconciliation is commitment, not a wager. True colors emerge, fixing Bill 218 match. Mohawk Council Ganawagi issues statement. Bill C-218 enters home stretch. Bill C-218 is a clear sign that Canada's commitment to reconciliation with First Nations was a shot. Alright. It's great. Okay. Decision making. Public documents. Policies. The Mercy Bridge Project. It's that they keep fucking with you guys. Like, mostly, like, being like, yeah, here, you guys can do the contract because we can't seem to do it right. And then you guys fucking it up, like, by trying to put your own fucking people in. It's so fucking retarded. Steven, did you? Oh, great. Yeah, you guys have not updated, like, at all. Oh my fuck. Okay. Wait. I see you guys do emails. Yeah, I knew it. You guys have a mailing list. Fucker. Okay. Pufferfish. Birds. Number one. Yeah, great. Local media, maybe? I don't get fucking how you guys say Joriodu. Like, how do we get back? Why does it spell out right? There's something with a weird fucking.
News update. It's minus 13 with wind chill making it feel like minus 18. Your weather details in minutes. Here's what's making news
Isn't that
right
the
now.
extent of it?
A 20-year-old man was shot in Montreal North near Roland Street and Pascal Street, which is near the exact same location a 33-year-old man was shot the night before. The 28-year-old was approached by a vehicle when shots fired at him, hitting him in the lower body. He was transported to the hospital and is in stable condition. A 12-year-old boy from the Eastern Township decided to collect donations on Saturday. After seeing news of a 74-year-old homeless man who died in Montreal, young Logan Lund
Yeah, the
decided
cart guy.
to act. For days, he
Sucks.
collected clothes and food from donators enough to fill a U-Haul. On Saturday, he decided to go out and give the donations out to
Fuck
Montrealers
that.
living on the street.
People that would be crying in the street, but they'd turn around last week because they didn't want to see us cry. And Logan would go up and high five them, you know. But he would notice their emotion before us.
That's not normal.
Really bad story. I love to see the smiles on their faces, and it's really amazing.
I'm Philip Gallo. U.S. officials are preparing to approve
It's not
evacuation
normal.
of some American diplomats and their families from Ukraine
Just
as
fuck
threats of
that,
Russian
man.
invasion
It's not
escalate.
what kids are supposed to be doing.
Sources from the administration confirming the U.S. State
I
Department
think I
is
fucking saw
preparing
some
to
lady or
approve the
kid there
evacuation
took up
of
sticker
American
that actually
diplomats and
had
their
gloves on
families from
at
the
one point.
embassy
I was like,
Ukraine
wow.
as the security
Oh, God.
situation deteriorates and becomes increasingly unpredictable. Unlike in Afghanistan, embassy staff and families would most likely be flown out on commercial flights. Other Americans have already been advised not to travel to Ukraine, and those in the country will be warned this week to depart.
And last night in sports,
To send the 49ers to the NFC Championship game. It was down the middle and good. 49ers win it. San Francisco is moving on with a 13-10 win here at Lambeau, and this crowd and that Packers team is stunned.
the 49ers shocked the number 1 seed Green Bay Packers as they beat them 13-10 with
Okay.
Robbie Gould hitting the last-second field goal to win the game. Aaron Rodgers now falls to 0-4 in the playoffs against the 49ers, and the Niners will either play the Bucs or the Rams in the NFC Championship next weekend. And in hockey,
Harris the snapper. Huber will hold it.
Oh my god, fucking please tell me more about hockey.
Cincinnati wins. Devon Taves leading it. Circling in the slot. Landeskog shoots and he put it off the glass. And Shushkin is on it. And Shushkin now right circle waits, sets it up to score. And it's Landeskog and the Avalanche have won 15 in a row at home. And they take this one in overtime, 3-2.
That's
the
I'm
Montreal
a
Canadiens
fucking-
lost the Colorado Avalanche 3-2 in overtime thanks to a goal from captain Gabriel Landeskog. Nick Suzuki had a goal and an assist on the night, and the Habs now fall to 8-25-7, which leaves them last in the entire league. With the latest from the PGA.
Oh, good job, fuck dumbass.
These extremely cold temperatures made it very easy for Tospa, Quebec to cancel overnight and weekend-long construction, with the exception of what will be happening tomorrow night on both sides of the Ville-Marie. It's snow removal until then in the late stages of those operations throughout the greater Montreal area. Black ice causing plenty of incidents again on Saturday.
Oh,
Be
black
cautious.
ice.
Slow it down, increase the distance between you
There's
and the
all
vehicles around
fucking
you.
motherfuckers on
Get
their
where you're headed
phones.
safely and soundly. I'm Mark Shalhoub, CJ 8800 Traffic.
I'm gonna right fucking license plate down. Like a police station in a
Your
month.
Storm Maple Weather Center forecast. It's minus 13 downtown. Today will be a mix of sun and
I'm-
cloud with a high of minus 9. Tonight will be clear with a high of minus 19.
4 minutes. I'm
And
not having a
tomorrow
little
will be a
weather.
mix of sun and cloud with a high of minus 14. For all the news during the day,
Kinda
tune
cool.
on your smart speaker.
Yes.
Just say play CGA 800. Your next CTV news update
Why
is
the
at
hell-
4 o'clock.
Oh.
What would you call
No.
the new crispy chicken sidekick made by Subway sandwich
Oh my
experts?
fucking god. Can't. Okay. I just want to know where the fucking TV is.
Introducing our new crispy chicken sidekick. Only $3.99. Only at Subway. And only here for a limited time.
Office.
Subway. Eat fresh. Freshly prepared for your order.
No. This is so hard to eat. My class is good.
During the winter sale on now at
Ugh.
Design Louis George. Right now, and for a limited time, save on dining room, bedroom, and living room furniture, on accessories, lighting, and luxurious sheets and towels. Top quality and top savings. The winter sale at Design Louis George on now. This is your big bright boutique
Oh.
CMR at 4360 Shamanda Pennsylvania. Cincinnati, free parking. DesignLouisGeorge.com.
Mm.
Sports enthusiasts, busy executives, active
Mm.
seniors, minimum invasive
Ooh.
surgery is a cost-effective
Ooh.
reality that will make you feel young again. No more excuses. Take that next step. Call Dr. Malik at 514-844-5250. There's something a little strange about this thing we call reality. It's time now to examine
Yeah.
neurological quandaries
You okay?
and evolutionary models. This is about to blow your mind.
Oh, baby. Oh. Too high here. Mm. Fucking shit.
Probably far more familiar with the Telltale Heart or the Black Cat. Two stories that contain similar elements and we'll touch on later in this episode. Yeah, so this is from Edgar Allan Poe's 1845 short story, Of the Perverse. And I'm interested today because in this short story, Poe brings up this concept of the imp of the perverse, or this motive toward perversity, the idea of doing something exclusively for the reason that you know it should not be done and not for any other reason. And in this story, The Imp of the Perverse, there is actually a murder. You don't get to the murder for a while. Oh, makes you wait. Before any plot, there's just this long musing, complete with lots of references to the pseudoscience of phrenology. But at the musing on this particular impulse of perverseness, the powerful urge to do what we should not, and to do it simply for the reason that it should not be done. And so Poe goes on to analyze this concept throughout this sort of essay section of the story. He calls it a radical primitive impulse, and he contrasts it with other types of drives that we have, which he frames in terms of the pseudoscience of phrenology again. He says it's different from mere combativeness, because combativeness stems from an instinct for self-defense, right? It's rooted in the desire to be well and to protect yourself from injury. So Poe writes, quote, "But in the case of that something which I term perverseness, the desire to be well is not only not aroused, but a strongly antagonistical sentiment exists." So I take that to mean he's trying to make clear he's not talking about any kind of self-defensive combativeness or antagonism, but rather a kind of suicidal antagonism, a thwarting of one's own best interests simply because you have a desire to do something that you shouldn't do. Now, the example that Poe uses here, of course, is one that I think most of us can't directly relate to. The idea of this impulse to confess a secret murder that you committed. But
Whoa, what?
The idea of being tempted to do something that you absolutely know you shouldn't do, like for no
Like
logical
murder?
reason other than
not in your own interest. Yeah.
right. Like I think we can all relate to that on some level. Like
You're gonna
I
wish
often think
to
about this
murder.
kind of thing when I'm in meetings. If I say, like a one-on-one meeting with my boss, like say it's a performance review or what have you, I'll suddenly I'll be sitting there nodding, listening, absorbing the information, and then like this random thought will occur, like, what if I lick the desk right now?
Yeah.
What if I started eating an ink pen, not just chewing on it, but just like really
Have you ever
chowing
seen
down
Fight
on it?
Club?
And I'm not illogically tempted to do these things, but then once the idea's in my mind, I just keep thinking about it.
I mean, it's different from, like, there are two very different ways to have a desire to say something inappropriate during a meeting with one's boss or something. One reason would be, well, maybe you've got all these kinds of pent up feelings about your boss and you're very angry and you think you've been wronged or something like that. And then that would be a sort of natural desire to express your feelings and rebel against some kind of injustice or get revenge by saying what you really think. That would be one thing. You're talking about something different, and Poe's talking about something different. When all those feelings aren't even necessarily there, just having this impulse to say something or do something completely inappropriate for no good reason at all.
Right.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I often have this thought when I'm in like a meeting or something's going on. Sometimes something just flashes into my head, like I could utter the following sentence and it would destroy my career.
Yeah, or just you think like, well, what if I like crab walked out of this meeting right now? You know, it wouldn't be that difficult to do, and yet it would totally it would totally change everyone's perceptions of how I experience reality and with which I take my job, that sort of thing. And I guess as we'll come back to in this episode, a lot of it comes down to just that weird dividing line between thought and action.
Yeah, it's almost
These
as
are
if
the
whenever
thoughts
you
that
do
you
this, you're
have, though.
exploring what it means to contemplate an action without doing it. It's kind of the same way. It's almost like you're feeling the texture of something in those moments where you wonder what it would be like to swerve into oncoming traffic or to jump off of a tall ledge. I mean, I remember a while back you did an episode with Christian about the idea of the call of the void, and I think this touches on some similar stuff, right? It's not necessarily that people do have suicidal ideation that is more deeply rooted in ongoing problems they have, but there's also just these sort of like momentary fleeting impulses that don't even seem to be connected to anything larger.
Yeah, that was. I definitely recommend listeners go back to that episode because we touched on not only how do we get these ideas in our head, this weird temptation to work at top of a tall building or on a cliffside. But in that episode, I shared how in the past I've also felt like this weird feeling like I need to press my wallet to the bottom of my pocket for fear that I'll take my wallet out and say throw it over the railing of the Empire State Building. And which is something I definitely don't want to do. But then once the idea has entered my head, it does sort of feel like I should take steps to keep it from happening.
Yeah, and you almost feel like you wonder for a second, am I going to be able to stop myself?
Yeah.
In this long section where Poe talks about the idea of peering into an abyss in the story, he says, quote, there is no passion in nature so demoniacally impatient as that of him who, shuddering upon the edge of a precipice, thus meditates the plunge. To indulge for a moment in any attempt at thought is not to be inevitably lost, for reflection but urges us to forbear, and therefore it is, I say, that we cannot. If there be no friendly arm to check us, or if we fail in a sudden effort to prostrate ourselves backwards from the abyss, we plunge and are destroyed. So it's this weird thing where he's almost like saying, you got to depend on some kind of part of you to suddenly be the guard. What if that part of you, the guard, isn't paying attention in some moment?
I believe I mentioned this in the Call of the Void episode, but stuff like this always makes me think of the author Robert Graves, his
this is just stupidity.
Autobiography, Goodbye to All That.
Edgar Allan Poe was a fucking
experiences in the war, but also
like
mountain
a fucking intelligent man or anything.
This one part where he talks about
climbing,
scaling these cliff sides with some friends, and how like the scariest moment was when birds were sailing close by. And having to sort of wrestle with this weird illogical feeling of love. What if I let go? What if like the birds were sort of tempting them with this siren song of like, let go and fly with us.
I don't know if this is inspired by that, but I seem to recall a kind of stock scene in a lot of cartoons, like Wile E. Coyote type cartoons, where a character, often the kind of bumbling, prone to injury kind of character, would be out over a ledge on a precipice or on a tightrope or something, and would be harassed by a bird fluttering around nearby. There's something that does seem to go deep about you being vulnerable at the edge, and then a creature that has powers that you can't, just floating around as light as a breeze.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely experienced it, say, standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon. Well, not the edge, several feet back. But still watching a bird traverse these to this drastic change in elevation without any issue at all.
Now, personally, Robert, do you find yourself to be, I think the term would be crimnophobic, having a fear of sharp drop-offs and precipices?
Yeah, at times, yeah. Like we have another episode that we are currently researching and recording soon on mountains, and just looking at certain pictures of mountains, looking at specifically walkways carved into the sides of mountains.
Oh yeah.
At times they made me cringe a little bit and I could just imagine myself crawling up or down those stairs as opposed to, walking up and down them like a normal pilgrim or something.
This is funny because I have tons of fears. I'm full of anxieties about all kinds of things in the world, but not this. I'm almost kind of drawn to sharp drop-offs. I always want to go right up to them and look over.
Yeah, well, not me. But of course, it's always a challenge taking a small child to these places.
Oh yeah,
because my son, he definitely wants to go up and check out the edge, and it just that unnerves me even more.
Well, I can imagine that would change everything. My whole life, I've had the experience of being told to stay away from the edge, even now.
Yeah, well, I had this issue before a kid was in my life for sure. Though it's just the edge is too close.
Well, anyway, sorry. So to come back to the Edgar Allan Poe story, the story goes on to tell of how the narrator he gives this long essay, this kind of speech about phrenology and about the imp of the perverse. And then he tells a very brief version of his story, which is that he came up with an ingenious plan to get away with murder. And the way he did it was he murdered someone with a poisoned candlestick because he knew they would light a candle to read in bed at night. And so he gets away with the murder undetected. But then years later, having totally gotten away with it, he is seized with this uncontrollable urge to confess in public, which he does kind of raving in the middle of a public, marketplace type area, which of course lands him in chains and sentenced to hang for his crime. And that's where he is as he tells the story. But the story itself might not be all that remarkable as far as Poe stories go, but it does bring up this interesting idea. It personifies this imp of the perverse. The idea of wanting to do something simply because it is something that should not be done.
That's not the same thing, though. What you're talking about is murdering someone.
Or because it's against one's own interest, that there's just some compelling force telling you not to do it. And that's the very reason you can't stop thinking about doing it.
Yeah,
I was thinking about showing you fucking flipping tables on my phone.
There's probably a better story that deals
Or
with a very similar premise. The idea, of course, in that, if you haven't read it, is that this guy killed an old man and buried him under the boards in his living room, I believe. The police come to ask questions, and he just hears something of the heart until it drives him bonkers, and he just starts pulling up the boards, right, or telling the investigators, like, look, he's under there, pull up the boards. I killed him, and his heart is beating. And in that, he's dealing with the imp of the perverse as well, manifested as this nagging, beating heart.
Now, it's been a while since I've read The Telltale Heart. Maybe you can answer this better than I. Do you think that does guilt play a role in that story? Is he guilty about what he has done, and is a feeling of guilt driving him toward his confession? Or is it more like the imp of the perverse, where he doesn't even seem to feel bad about it? He's just got this urge to tell. Well,
you feel like almost immediately?
I remember seeing like a stage adaptation of it as a kid.
Yeah.
I used to think it was more of a guilt issue, because that seems like the
is that just fucking oil?
The idea that you've done this horrible thing, the way that the thing was done, I think it was about confession. But having become acquainted with the imp of the perverse now, which I, before researching this episode, I'm not familiar with, I think it really makes me realize that Poe was probably thinking about other ideas. Maybe he was doing something a little more complicated in the human mind, as opposed to this more cliched imbalancing the human heart.
So maybe his urge to confess was not a moral urge, but more just kind of the end of the perverse. It's in your Odyssey. Yeah. So one thing I think about, especially given all the references to phrenology in this Poe story, I guess, before you had psychology, you had pseudoscience, like phrenology, and it makes me think about, what's the kind of bridge between these two worlds, getting to modern psychology, and that makes me just Freudianism. I don't know if your brain kind of goes to the same place there.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, you see echoes of things like the end of the perverse in the writings and psychoanalysis style of Freud, right? Where he talks about things like a death drive or a death instinct, right? And would that be sort of related?
Yeah, I believe so. And I found a few authors that have chimed in on this.
Mm-hmm.
So Sigmund Freud, just to refresh, lived 1856 through 1939, and he's best remembered for his work on the unconscious mind.
Oh,
But also theorized about the role of powerful instincts that energize the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And these instincts are numerous and varied, but he grouped them into two main categories. There's eros, the life instinct, and then there's thanatos, the death instinct. And these names, of course, refer to the Greek mythological gods of life and death.
Mm-hmm.
So the sexual influence of the libido only connects directly to the instincts of eros, while the instincts of thanatos focus on aggression, self-destruction, and cruelty. So I think it would be reasonable to situate the imp of the perverse within the Freudian instinct family of thanatos.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I was looking around for papers on this, and I found a really good one from Lorelei Carman. And she explored this in a 2014 paper titled The Urge to Tell versus the Need to Conceal, Confession as Narrative Desire in Poe's The Black Cat, The Telltale Heart, and The Imp of the Perverse.
Oh, okay.
And this was published in American and British Studies Annual. And as the title indicates, the author, Carman, points out that Poe considered the drive to confess in not only The Imp, but also in the more well-known Black Cat and The Telltale Heart. Quote, what is noteworthy is the nature of these confessions. Their inexplicable, irrational quality, as if driven by a certain kind of urgency, by a force seemingly independent of their will. If the crimes committed appear more or less calculated, their confessions, by contrast, are almost unaccountably impulsive.
That's totally accurate to the actual writing of the story, The Imp of the Perverse. I mean, the author is cold and calculating and psychopathic about the crime. He thinks it through, he plans it out, he doesn't appear to feel bad about it.
Okay.
But then the desire to confess comes on as just this kind of like obsession from out of nowhere that he can't keep his mouth closed. He's running around thinking, I'm about to blurt it out, and then he does.
Yeah, in this paper, the author points out that the past critics, such as Arthur Brown and Henry Sussman, have taken all of this apart, with the latter, Sussman, pointing out that the act of confession in these tales is a, quote, transgression of the boundaries between the private and the public. Kind of like, again, that gray line between thought and action. In these stories we see something that exists in the mind leaking out. The desire to tell overpowers the desire for concealment.
Well, one thing I wonder about with the references to phrenology in the story is that in the 19th century there could easily have been anxieties about the idea of an emerging science of the mind. Do you ever think about this? Like so a person always has their private thoughts. Their thoughts are their own, or maybe they're between them and the God they believe in, whatever. But they're private. And
now you guys get to hear everything.
But I wonder if you live in a world where there are all these burgeoning sciences, and the sciences are increasingly intruding into domains like life and and the social sciences and the mind itself, and emerging fields like psychology. You have to start to wonder, will people be able to read my mind with these sciences? Is there going to be a diminution of the private privilege with one's own thoughts?
When we see this kind of anxiety reflected in some works of science fiction over the years. The idea of thought police, just determining what's going on inside your head, of passing through that boundary between action and thought. I was in fact just reading a Peter Watts short story about this very topic. But in these stories, something that Carmen points out.
I can't fucking handle you guys at all.
scholars is that, you know, it's ultimately
This
not
is
as
not
simple as,
scholar
oh, this
conversation.
character
This
is
is fucking
mad,
idiotic.
and that's why they did their crime and or blurted it out. But that there's something going on in the unconscious that is, by definition, unreadable. And that's the ultimate spooky, scary, mysterious part. That there's something going on in there. That there are these contradictory drives in the subconscious, and we don't really know what to expect from them. Well, yeah, I can see the story situated again in kind of a bridge land between an old model that might often, like an old model of the mind that might have often said, if you have drives or desires that don't feel like yours, that's the demon. You know, like that you could actually have the devil whispering in your ear.
They're making it a religious thing.
And you've got devil possession and all that.
That is a shocker. I am surprised. Oh god, you guys are so great.
Maybe you don't consciously understand all of your own drives and desires and motivations. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In all of this, I can't help but think back to, I can't remember the exact biblical passage, but you know, the basic ideas you reflect in a lot of Christian theology, that if you do something in your heart, it is as if you did it in real life, as if you actually committed the act. Yeah, and again, like even that, without getting into kind of like the theological discourse on it, that's kind of dealing in this thin line, or this kind of seemingly thin line between thought and action, between contemplation of the theological and the you know, and committing the illogical. Yeah, and in that whole thing, I mean, I can see arguments on both sides of the whole, like if you are, whoever has felt wrath against his brother has committed murder in his heart. On one hand, I mean, that seems like that's almost kind of a very bad lesson to teach people, right? Like, you know, it's just as bad to think about doing something bad as it is to actually do it. It kind of blurs the line.
But see, the only person I've ever thought about murdering, I would do it in front of everybody, and I would fucking make it very public. Like, I would make sure that everybody knew that, like, I took Tommy out. Yeah. I guess if you want to put it in jail, like, I mean,
it does highlight, even if we can say that's maybe
that was
bad
like,
advice, it does highlight something.
I think you need to contemplate like a child rapist.
You know, if you allow yourself to contemplate something that you know you should not do a lot, you may very well.
And then like constantly getting to the point with like fucking whatever jail time thing. It was like a vacation.
A little bit more.
It did 3 whole months. Armed robbery, not even for raping his daughter. Yeah, no, I'm gonna take Tommy out. If I ever see Tommy again, I'll fucking take him out.
Remote wireless technology, so you can sit back and control your window dressing from anywhere. Check out their dynamic full winter collection. Currently 30% off fabrics for drapes, design, home decor, and haute couture.
Seriously, it's fucked up. I cannot believe you guys are just like literally just like full on like. Sometimes I think about fucking murdering people, but like I want like I contemplate like if I can handle not getting caught. It was basically what that just happened. That's fucked up. What? Like what? What? Who hurt you? Like we're hugged enough as a child, obviously. I don't know. That's what we're talking about on the radio now. I'm always cold. Like it's fucking annoying. I have an apartment I should be in, and I cannot be in my apartment. It's fucking lesbians. So that's why.
not for other reasons.
Oh, I can't imagine what you guys are hinting at.
Psychology Today by Neil Bruno.
Yeah, they're trying to bring up a certain kind of conversation, maybe.
It brought up a few interesting things. So this article tells an interesting story about the inhibition in neuroscience. And the story starts when Bruno was in graduate school, and he talks about how he witnessed a neuropathology examination of a deceased patient. And so a neuropathology examination involves cutting open the brain and examining it and figuring out, was there any damaged tissues or neural degeneration. And also present at this examination was a social worker who had known the patient before he died. And so the autopsy revealed degeneration in the prefrontal cortex, especially of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And this is the outer part of the brain starting above the temples and sort of reaching up onto the outside of the forehead. And Bruno mentions that this area is important for cognitive control. I was reading about its role in cognition and behavior, and it's generally believed to have a lot to do with many different kinds of executive function. This includes things like selective attention, choosing what to pay attention to and what to think about, things like working memory and meta-memory.
Oh my god, I'm terrified if you start to fucking think. You think it sounds like a fucking bad idea, friend.
Whether a particular memory is relevant or correct. But this area also appears to have things to do with planning, with regulating and overriding emotions, and crucially with inhibition. And the management of inhibition also appears to be a major function of the prefrontal cortex in general, which, remember, showed damage all over in this patient. So because of this physical neuropathology, the doctor performing the autopsy asked the man's social worker if he had had any issues with impulsiveness and control. And the social worker said, yes, in fact, later in life, this man had repeatedly had a problem with jumping out of moving cars. Jumping out of moving cars. And I thought, that's really interesting because that's not just something like, taking food out of somebody's hand or sexually inappropriate behavior, things that are certainly wrong, but that you can see how disinhibition would allow just sort of natural urges that people have otherwise to come out without being mediated by the thought, I shouldn't do that. With jumping out of moving cars, you have to wonder more, like, where does that urge come from to begin with? And in fact, this kind of thing is more common than we might normally imagine. Bruno himself writes that, quote, 57% of people with frontotemporal dementia, which is a neural degeneration that targets the frontal and temporal lobes, violate social norms, engaging in sexual transgressions and public nudity, shoplifting in front of store managers, eating out of the trash. It is common knowledge in the field of neuroscience now that these behaviors are due to a problem of disinhibition because of a deterioration of the cognitive control network of the lateral prefrontal cortex.
No, not even
so I was looking into this more, and I found even more support for the role of the prefrontal cortex in inhibiting imp-like behaviors, and more evidence that when the prefrontal cortex is impaired, inhibition suffers, and we begin to act out transgressive and inappropriate behaviors. So one study I looked at was called Diagnosis and Management of Behavioral Issues in Frontotemporal Dementia by Manicari and Huey in Current Neurology and Neuroscience Report from 2012. And you're right, behavioral disinhibition is a classic hallmark of the behavioral variant of frontotemporal dementia. Quote, within the first several years of symptoms, patients can behave contrary to social norms. They may inappropriately touch or aggressively approach strangers, or even engage in theft or other criminal behaviors. Patients may also disregard subtler social norms to make offensive jokes or sexual remarks, encroach on the personal space of others, and exhibit childish behavior and a general lack of etiquette. Disinhibition may also be exhibited in the form of rash or impulsive actions like gambling or repeatedly falling for financial scams. The largest autopsy-confirmed study of BVFTD, or behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia, found 76% of patients exhibited behavioral disinhibition or impulsivity. So it seems like when something happens to this part of the brain, when you've got impairment of the frontotemporal area, you see this almost all the time, that there is a problem with regulating one's behavior, and you see people acting out things that they might think about but wouldn't normally do.
And this is all quite an issue to consider because, again, we're getting back to the
the idea that the
Oh my god,
you know,
like,
the
this is
choice
fucked
is
up.
kind of being taken out of our hands, right?
Yeah.
In this case, it's, we're getting down to officially a brain injury.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of thing really always makes me consider stuff like criminal justice. You know, the idea that that okay, so we say we want to live in a society where people are held accountable for their actions, and that seems to make sense to me intuitively. You don't
I
want
can't
people to
imagine
just
how we
go around
segued
walking
over
and
into
harming
this
other people, getting
conversation.
away with it, and not
We're talking about
facing
people going, sending people to jail.
But then at the same time, it's hard to look at stuff like this and think that it really makes sense to punish people for their behaviors when our behavior, you know, we can go out and hurt people because we have a tumor in a certain part of our brain, or because we're experiencing dementia due to old age or some kind of brain disease, or because we have a head injury. All kinds of physical facts that we would agree people are not at all to blame for contribute to them doing things that violate social norms and harm other people. And so if that's the case, also people didn't pick the brain they were born with either. You didn't ask to be born with a brain that makes you more likely to be aggressive or invade people's personal space. And yet then again, we can't like encourage those behaviors. I don't know.
Swear to God, if you're the one who steals shit out of my car,
real pickle and thinking about how to deal with
fucking freak the fuck out, bro.
Yeah, I do feel like a lot of it does kind of spring forth from older ideas about, you know, in which, you know, committing an improper act is the statement on a pure moral failing.
Yeah.
You know, some problem in the soul, as opposed to something that is, you know, that is a medical issue. But I was also further wondering about the idea of like impulses and impulse control, because okay, so we know that certain parts of the brain are very important for keeping the imp of the perverse from taking control of the wheel, right? From the prefrontal cortex, the frontotemporal regions, these play some kind of major role in inhibition. And if there's injury to them or something is wrong in there, you can suddenly start doing things that you normally would stop yourself before acting out. But I wonder about the first half of the equation, like the urges themselves. Where do the urges to do the wrong thing come from in the first place? In this article I was talking about a minute ago, Bruneau identifies the orbitofrontal cortex as a likely seat of impulses like this, and he links this to the way that like tumors in the orbitofrontal cortex can sometimes cause people to suddenly start engaging in criminal behaviors that they never would have before, and like the awful history of frontal lobotomy, you know, that went into the orbitofrontal cortex and severed connections in there through the eye socket, and the idea that this would reduce aggression and inappropriate behaviors, which it often did, but also just did general damage to people's brains and personalities in many cases, and that's a kind of horrible story in the history of medical neuroscience.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that's one of the real life horror stories, kind of circling around all of this. Yeah. But anyway, so I looked this up, and based on all the literature I was reading, it also seems like the orbitofrontal cortex plays some major role in decision making and emotions and behavioral inhibition, such that injuries or tumors or degenerative disease in the OFC can lead to disinhibited behavior. Though I'm no neuroscientist, obviously, but reading around, I can't see quite exactly the reason that the imp would necessarily be there, except to say that, like the lateral prefrontal cortex, the orbitofrontal cortex is generally important for value-based decision-making and behavioral control. For example, I was looking at a 2017 paper in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience by Corponet et al. That just found a strange thing that it increases in the volume of the prefrontal cortex and prefrontal functional connectivity were related to impulsive and antisocial psychopathic traits. But anyway, so multiple regions of the prefrontal cortex do appear to play a significant role in the generation of impulse to act out.